And we're live. It's a little odd for me of an experience to be both the backstage manager and the speaker. So just give me one moment to orient myself. Um, yeah, this is a new kind of segment that we want to bring forth as a companion to the AI infused newsletter. We're calling this Open Dialogue. And the objective today is to have an open dialogue, an open conversation around three main topic areas. Some of the things that we've covered through the newsletter in various formats. We have the topic number one being community over marketing by exploring anti hype knowledge diffusion. Bullet point number two is citizen empowerment through evaluation of concepts, methodologies, and tooling from the perspective of seasoned practitioners. And bullet point number three is human centricity by bridging the gap between cross cultural inclusion and technological development. So, before I dive into these topics, if you're watching live, I'd love to just get a hands raise or a comment so I can monitor the chat for any burning questions or any curiosities you might have. Or if you have comments, I'd love to hear them. Again, I'm talking into an empty room, so it's a bit of a different kind of experience for me. So the engagement would be much appreciated. Um, but yeah, before I jump into these topics, my name is Joaquin Milata. I've been developing events and media and content around AI technologies over the last 2.5 years. And I've been working as a professional event producer for the last 5 years in the space of symbolic AI technologies. Um, I have found in these 5 years this chasm, this gap between the knowledge of the practitioners, the truth of what it takes to implement AI technology in a productive manner in the real world in enterprise settings, and what is promised through marketing campaigns and tooling vendors, that promise you the moon and the sky and all these things, and it's a bit jarring. um it's so easy to get wrapped up in promises when you have hope and there's a lack of knowledge and understanding of the underlying principles and concepts. And the current educational institutions are not able to provide you with sufficient expertise or training or hands-on involvement with what is required to be a productive worker, a productive member of a organization in today's rapidly evolving landscape of technologies and new tools and all these different things. So we're hoping to meet that gap somewhere in the middle and create content, create material that will get you thinking, that will open the door for you to be able to absorb more experienced tutorials and other things. That's another thing, the language barrier. A lot of people that have been working in AI for a long time have a very dense domain vocabulary that isn't always easy to parse through or understand if you're uninitiated or if you're not in the same kinds of circles or conferences or um, learning environments. So learning on your own is sometimes a little bit of out of reach or difficult. There's a lot of friction involved with having to do a lot of disambiguation of terminology or how people are using certain phrases in different ways. Um, I digress. We're gonna talk about these three bullet points in a time box fashion of 8 minutes each. And at any point, stop me, let me know. But I'll get started with community over marketing by exploring anti hype knowledge diffusion. So I guess I was kind of already getting into that. Yeah, there's nothing simple to this word community. I mean, you could say it's a shared identity by a group of people that have similar needs, or you could talk about people that live in close proximity to each other in a geographical location, like my neighbors and my neighborhood as a community. You could talk about people that have shared responsibilities. You could talk about, for example, the parent teacher association that is a part of schooling systems, where parents meet with teachers to ensure successful outcomes are ensured or improved for their students, for their children. That would be a form of community. But the kind of community that I'm talking about today is a community of practice. Swarm and this AI infused media platform is showcasing what people are doing in imperfect situations with a lot of uncertainty, looking to apply the physics of reality, the constraints of operationalizing an idea, building a concept, sustaining themselves with fair market labor rates, sustaining themselves by paying for the overhead involved with the servers, with the tooling, with all the compute costs. These are non-trivial problems, and there's no way you can get a simulation of this in a classroom. It's just so volatile that a community practice is something that is required in various fashions for people to learn from each other and co-solve problems that are uh, something you can't overcome on your own. So that's sort of been the background behind Swarm. There's so much tacit knowledge, there's so much knowledge stored in stories and lived experiences that it's hard to replicate that outside of conversations in a table, conversations in rooms that may or may not have people that look like you, but they have similar objectives, similar pursuits, and similar problems that they're looking to solve. Um, However, when you look at marketing, not all the time, good marketing is informative and educational, and it gives you the concepts to solve some of these problems on your own without having to use a specific tool. But marketing in today's realm, with the fight of attention and the growing cost of advertising and the amount of labor that isn't easy to trace back to business results, a lot of that marketing is now desperately trying to get your attention and get you to buy without having an assurance of a tangible outcome, or having all the elements required to fulfill a promise that frankly is a bit out of touch with reality. Um, Over the last, I want to say 5, 6 years, I've seen this growing. Um, it's like mass hysteria, mass delusion, and it's sort of becoming true now. But there's this idea that AI is going to save the world. It's going to become a super intelligent, and it's going to be able to replace all the workers, and we're going to live all in a utopia where we don't have to work and we get universal basic income, and we won't have to deal with petty wars or resources. um like, these are some of the loftier goals, uh but the technology hasn't been there, and the prerequisite for that technology to be usable and useful and applicable in the scenarios that are required are constrained by the infrastructure of the organizations that are trying to adopt this. So, for example, the data sets that are found in these organizations are a heaping hot mess. They're everywhere. They're distorted. They're mutated. They're not kempt. They don't have adequate metadata. They don't have adequate data governance policies. There's not enough resources available to consciously or proactively make efforts to preserve these things. And yet they just magically think that at the push of a button or at the sign of a contract, a team of vendors are going to come in and resolve all your problems. It's really out of touch, and I think that goes into the fear of meeting quarterly performance or adhering to the theatrics of the markets. I was having a conversation yesterday with somebody in private equity, and I was making this criticism that how can a company that was created 2 years ago be valued at a certain amount of money, billions or trillions of dollars? And they stopped me in a sort of mocking tone and told me it's not about its real value. It's not about the intellectual property that they've developed. It's not about the infrastructure that they possess and own or the assets or the people. It's all based on speculation and perception. If you believe something will be vastly useful and productive in 50 years, that's how people value it today. And I think that's lunacy, because the reality of the situation is everybody's trying to convince you that these technologies are a silver bullet to all our problems everywhere all at once, but nobody's peeling the layers underneath to tell you that, hey, we might be 5 years off. Hey, um, this has limitations. These are the constraints. You need trained staff. You need adequate governance policies. Nobody wants to tell you the real chasm and investment that is required to get there. So community is a way to kind of circumvent those mass channel efforts. uh, Peer-to-peer connections are the smallest form of democracy, of self-governing each other or proposing ideas and following through with them instead of relying on employers or corporate institutions or governmental institutions. We should be able as individual global citizens to clump together and pool our ideas or experience and resources to resolve some of these problems ourselves, because nobody's coming to save us. I strongly believe we're here to save ourselves. Yeah, so that's bullet point number one. Open to questions or comments or concerns. But I'll move on to point number two while I wait. So, in every engagement, every media production, every piece of content, every event, whenever I recruit for speakers or whenever I try to engage the market for valuable insights, my primary demographic is someone that has lived experiences. Um, Personal history and practical insight is something you can't fabricate or replicate through ChatGPT or any kind of LLM. Uh, Everything that you are able to query through a existing large language model tool or something that aggregates things and then creates a summary on your behalf for you to ingest a slurry of different sources, that is all based on existing knowledge that has been recorded through the internet. But that is not uniquely personalized or contextualized to the situations or the things that you need to know. You can only ask questions around what you know, or you don't know. But when you engage with an expert, when you engage with a person that is telling you about a story of something that happened to them, you're able to take advantage of learning from people and learning about things you don't know, or you don't know. Um yeah, I'm getting myself wrapped up in that matrix of knowing and not knowing, but this is the lens, this is a hypothesis that I've had, and I have not been disappointed at all in learning from people that have a decade, 2 decade, 3 decades of experience. Um, I'm personally not a deep technical practitioner. I've always been an operations individual. I've always gotten things done by getting project plans done, negotiating deliverables with the management, looking at resources and budgets and timelines and trying to make things happen in a compressed fashion without compromising on quality. Um, but you can't um, you can't substitute experience with these blended together textual documents that are basically technological techno lords that are taking advantage of our collective intellectual property. It just doesn't work that way. You can't just substitute and cut out a subject matter expert overnight. That's part of the lunacy that people aren't worth anything anymore, and you can trust a technology that has no blood, no conscience, that feeds you all this sweet sugary lies that you want. um I don't believe that at all. It's useful, don't get me wrong. I'm not arguing that we shouldn't be using these tools or learning about them. I I've been doing this for 2.5 years, getting 260 plus speakers to share knowledge and make it accessible for free. I believe it's really important, but I believe it's also important for us to properly calibrate our expectations around these things. Um, so another initiative that I have here is the citizen empowerment through evaluation of concepts, methodologies, and tooling. Um, if you adopt the tool before you are cognizant of the concepts and methodologies that allow you to use a tool, it's kind of silly to think that you can maximize the value of that tool. I'll give you two examples. If you have a spoon or you have a fork, if you saw the Little Mermaid, the Little Mermaid had no concept of what it is to use a eating utensil, because under the sea they don't use eating utensils for whatever reason. Um, but she used the fork as a comb because she had a concept of a comb. It's very much that way with these tools. You're gonna be using them in ways that you're not aware of the limitations or the dangers involved with that. um, and you may inadvertently not use it to its full effectiveness, or be constantly frustrated at its limitations because you don't know how to compensate for its shortcomings, or use it in the appropriate use cases. That's why I think it's important to start from the root of knowledge, which is how do we how do we see these worlds in the context of our lives? How do we see these tools in the context of where it's being applied? Um, Here's the second example that I can share with you that I'm just pulling out of my hat right now. Um, if you were to have a jackhammer given to somebody without knowledge of this civilization or our common way of living, they wouldn't know what to do with a jackhammer. It's a power tool that has a very strong piston force that can break really hard rock. Now, would individuals use it for breaking rock? We don't know what they would use it for, but unless we have a concept to serve as the glue or a methodology to give an easy way of somebody socializing a behavior and learning through a learning loop, a learning cycle, that once they develop competency, they can provide feedback to somebody else. How can we expect them to fully maximize the benefits or minimize the harm that they can do to themselves or to other people? That's what this whole thing about the AI bubble is about. People don't know that they might be leaking private information of their employer, of their organization, of their clients, that they might be breaking their fiduciary responsibility of who they're serving, and that in turn gives them a liability. Um, in serving expert counsel in their respective areas of practice, whether they're a doctor, a lawyer, a surgeon. Earlier on, there were cases where doctors were giving false diagnosis and they were causing harm to their patients, or there were uh, what you call hallucinations from the search engines, or asking questions through ChatGPT or etc., where you would ask, "How do I keep the cheese on my pizza?" and it would suggest that you put glue on it to create an adhesive surface so you can have the cheese on the pizza. That can cause harm to vulnerable populations that don't have the discernment to say, "Hey, I don't think you should be eating glue." So if you don't know these things and there's no adequate training or awareness on how to screen through that, or you don't have pre-existing methodologies and conceptual models like media literacy, I should check the quality of information that I receive before I take a action, you know? Should we be eating glue? If I read the package on the glue, it'll say toxic, do not consume. So why is this device telling me to eat glue? Some people don't have that training, media training. They're not, maybe they have a mental constraint, you know, maybe they had a traumatic impact, or they were born with a particular genetic predisposition to have something, and they put their trust in the machine in non-trivial scenarios that could lead to a lot of self-harm or unintended harm to others. So we're really hoping that this media platform, this knowledge sharing platform, will be a way to clear out some of those unknown concepts, to prime you with things that may help you in further discovery of these different ideas and tools. Um, and then I'm just gonna answer the third, seeing as we're running on like 8 more minutes. Human centricity by bridging the gap between cross cultural inclusion and technological development. Um, Innovation is not evenly distributed. You have educational institutions, you have industry clustered in specific geographical areas because it's strategic, or because of some sort of shared history. One example is MIT and a spin-off MIT School for Entrepreneurship having a downstream impact on people being more prepared for being entrepreneurs in a particular geographical area, and then that propagating into a network of alumni that are helping each other out and developing things, and creating a Silicon Valley, you know, or something along the lines of that, where you have a disproportionate accumulation of resources and knowledge and innovation in one area that is then trickling out and having ripples on other people, but is not representative of every worldview. There's no representation from indigenous knowledge or people that are not conforming to the standards of those institutions. Um, you have technology that is representative of those cultural norms and values. Uh, Example given here with the LLMs that we use, and when it was initially used, a lot of the training data that was incorporated was information that was scraped from the World Wide Web. Now, not everybody has access to internet and electricity around the world, and if they do, maybe they speak in other languages. So you can assume that the English language that was scraped was mainly from Western countries like the UK and other English speaking countries in those areas, as well as the United States. So the norms, the beliefs, the implicit assumptions, the thinking patterns, the speaking patterns, the words that are commonly used, like delve, for example, that's been a debated issue here. Delves from the South African or African annotators that were improving some of these things. They put in British colloquial language that uses that very frequently. That is then being used and consumed in all other uses of these toolings. So for us to have proper inclusion, which is a very difficult thing to do when we have so many different languages and ways of encoding knowledge, grammatical structures, um, symbolic representation of meaning. Like you have I think four different kinds of writing writing systems in Japanese: hiragana, katakana, um, I think furi something, and then you have kanji. which is the characters that represent whole words. There's no unified treatment of linguistics through every different country. Germans have a different grammatic structure than plain English. Spanish has a different way of conjugating people, things, past, present, and future, whatever. There's all these different, and they introduce the idea of masculine and feminine objects or qualities. So every language has its little nuances. If everything's stemming from English, it may flatten the interpretation of languages in other areas. It may impose certain views that are not conformant with the views and cultures and ideals of other cultures, like Hindi from India. You know, you have those that kind of writing. You have the kanji from Japan. You have the characters in Chinese. They all have their own different way of thinking and grammatic structure. Um, So yeah, if we want to create a world that is inclusive, we need to bring everybody to the table or whoever's willing to come and participate. And we need to have discussions about the nuances and everybody's unique representation and culture and values. And then we need to figure out ethical ways of co-creating data sets that are representative of their worldview and then give them the tools for them to use that for their purposes. I mean, that seems to me to a logical conclusion. If you look into healthcare, healthcare suffers from this quiet kind of racism or quiet kind of racial disparity where we all as human beings have a beating heart and two lungs and kidneys and all these things. We all have skin, but there are subtle differences in our genetic makeup that make us prone to different kinds of diseases based on our geographical location and how we've evolved over generations. Um, so having awareness, having an acceptance, and finding ways of documenting and accumulating information and data sets around these particular genetic differences will allow us to provide personalized treatment to people. You may or may not know, but you know, there's a lot of mortality. There's a very high mortality rate for women of color. You know, that they may complain about a particular ailment and they may be unjustifiably excluded from receiving treatment because they think it's a part of their cultural characteristic. And then you have women dying during childbirth, things that are avoidable. So, you know, this is not just like a matter of preference or inclusion for inclusion's sake. These are real world consequences that our society should be creating, not an equilibrium, but it should be creating like a gateway for everybody to have an equal chance. You also see these algorithms that are being used with the good intention of improving the operational efficiency of like HR recruiting capabilities or training or looking at students to grade their work, but it doesn't always pay mind to their unique ideas or culture or the merit that they have in their own unique way. We can't be manufacturing, we can't be industrializing the treatment of people. So, you know, with this 1 minute, I just want to leave you with I'd love for you to take part in these conversations. Um, this is an open dialogue. I feel like I spoke this whole time, and I'm frankly relieved that it's nearly over. But I'm glad I had enough fuel in the tank to come up with all these ideas and share them with you. But this is an open dialogue, and I really hope that you can take an opportunity to join us in this learning journey. I'm learning every time that I host a thing or I speak with an expert. I will never be full. I will never be an expert. I will never consider myself to be not a student. I hope that you have that mentality and you can bring it here, and with that shared curiosity that we can find ways of adding more value to the world and making it more equitable, and just being part of a society that is healthy, stable, without disease, without hunger. I really think we can live in that world if we all make a conscious effort to try a little harder, to understand each other, and to share our lived experiences. So I didn't even mention the title, but that's my idea of AI on human terms. And just to close it out, in subsequent episodes of this webinar series, we're going to have different contributors to the AI infused newsletter writing team and guest contributors. So if you are interested in taking part of these things, um, reach out, make a submission, cover a topic that is uniquely fit for your lived experiences, and we'll be in touch. We'll make things happen. All right. Happy Friday, and I hope you have a good rest of your week.